The morning of Mom's funeral began with mist crawling over Newport Bay, soft and colorless, the kind of weather that makes glass walls weep. I stood before the mirror in my childhood bedroom, one of the few rooms Dad hadn't sterilized in his quest for a modern home. The wallpaper still held the faint scent of Mom's perfume, iris and cedar, and the memories pressed against me like hands. The black dress I slipped into looked simple. Clean lines, no embellishment, quiet dignity. To anyone else it was unremarkable. But the stitching traced hours of my own hands, a couture piece from the atelier I built in secret. $30,000 of invisible craftsmanship disguised as modesty. Mom used to say true elegance whispers. I guess no one at that funeral had learned to listen. When I arrived, the parking lot gleamed with leased luxury Blake's Mercedes, Rachel's borrowed Porsche, and my own 10-year-old Prius that seemed to sigh as I turned off the engine. Through the tall church windows, I saw them already posing. My father Gerald in his outdated Armani suit, Blake networking with mourners, and Rachel in a fitted Valdaire dress tight enough to advertise the brand she hoped would renew her contract. I slipped in through the side door, praying to avoid the pity line, but Aunt Martha spotted me instantly. "Oh, Elise, darling," she cooed, scanning me from hair to hem in that silent arithmetic of judgment wealthy relatives perfect by 40. "How's your little boutique?" "It's fine, Aunt Martha," I said, smoothing my dress. "You know," she leaned closer, voice syrupy, "my neighbor's daughter opened a shop on Etsy. Doing quite well, maybe you two should share tips." I smiled the smile that had seen me through 15 years of their condescension. "That's very thoughtful." Inside, I was already drifting elsewhere to Mom, who'd taught me to keep my grace even when others mistook it for weakness. The service began. Music swelled, all strings and grandeur, nothing like what Mom would have wanted. She hated performances of grief. The pastor, who'd met her twice, spoke about devotion to family, and I bit my tongue. Mom's devotion had been to truth, and to beauty, and to the women who stepped into her boutique and walked out taller. When the benediction ended, murmurs filled the hall. I made my way toward the coffee station, hoping caffeine could anchor me. That's when Rachel's voice sliced through the air. "There she is." Heads turned. My sister stood near the floral display, surrounded by her usual orbit of admirers, women who mistook proximity to a fading model for status. Her smile was perfect, her tone laced with sugar and venom. "Elise, we were just talking about you," she said. "All good things, I hope," I managed. "Of course." She tilted her head. "Vivian was saying how brave you are, keeping Mom's little shop open. Though honestly," she lowered her voice to a stage whisper, "wouldn't it be easier to work retail? Nordstrom has great benefits." Vivian, whose husband had quietly filed for bankruptcy, nodded solemnly. "There's no shame in a steady paycheck." I took a sip of my coffee, which tasted like burnt forgiveness. "I'll keep that in mind." Then Rachel struck her tone rehearsed. "I just can't believe you wore that to Mom's funeral," she said, gesturing to my dress. "I mean, times must be tough, but couldn't you have tried? Mom deserved better than off the rack." Her little chorus of friends tittered, synchronized cruelty in designer heels. "Hey Ellie," Blake added, appearing at her shoulder, using the nickname I'd asked him to retire a decade ago. "If you ever need money for something appropriate next time, just ask. We're family." How generous, I thought, noting the tired creases his concealer couldn't hide. Out loud, I said only, "I'll remember that." The words floated between us, sharp and soft. Dad approached, silver hair perfectly arranged, the patriarch who believed compassion was weakness. "Elise is doing fine with her hobby," he said, tone dismissive. "Your mother left her that space free and clear. Sometimes that's enough for some people." "Some people," Rachel echoed, smiling as if the phrase were a toast. "She's not doing that badly. That vintage Prius is very eco-friendly." Laughter shimmered around them, the laughter of people who confuse cruelty with conversation. If only they knew. The Prius was camouflage, the studio apartment a penthouse in disguise, the boutique their mother's legacy and my empire. I watched them. Blake fiddling with his phone, Rachel basking in the illusion of relevance, Dad pretending control over a kingdom already cracked. And I thought, you still don't see me. After all these years, you still see only what's convenient. My coffee had gone cold, but I raised the cup anyway. To Mom, I said quietly. They murmured agreement, unaware that my toast was to the woman who'd taught me patience and power and the art of letting people underestimate you. Because when the truth finally comes out, it shines brighter for all the years you kept it hidden. The church reception hall smelled of lilies and disinfectant grief trying too hard to be graceful. Tables draped in white linen bowed under the weight of finger sandwiches and sympathy casseroles, offerings from people who'd never known my mother beyond her Christmas cards. I moved quietly among them, balancing a paper plate and an ache I couldn't name. Everywhere I went, whispers followed like perfume. Such a shame. She was so talented. Poor Elise still running that little shop. The tone always softened on the last phrase, as though my boutique were a burden they pitied me for carrying. They had no idea it was the foundation beneath their world of borrowed wealth. Aunt Martha waved me over again, holding court near the punch bowl. Elise, darling, did you meet the pastor's wife? She just opened a consignment boutique in Laguna. You two would have so much to talk about. I'll bet we would, I said, keeping my smile polite and my jaw unclenched. Dad drifted through the room, like a man auditioning for the role of grieving widower, shaking hands, offering firm nods, repeating the same practiced line. She was the heart of our family. I wondered if he realized how hollow it sounded. Mom had been the heart, but he'd spent years pretending her pulse beat only for his ambitions. When she died, he'd lost his audience more than his wife. I found a seat by the window where rain streaked the glass in slow, deliberate trails. Outside, the sky hung low over Newport Bay, heavy as unspoken truth. I sipped my watery coffee and let the noise blur. Then Rachel's laughter, sharp, metallic, cut through it all. Elise, there you are, she called across the hall, waving me over like a pet she'd misplaced. The women surrounding her turned, their sympathy smiles already loaded. We were just talking about your shop, she said when I reached them. Vivian here says she saw your dresses online, so cute. Cute? Vivian echoed, eager to please. Yes, very accessible. I told her you'd probably do well if you marketed to, normal women. I felt a small, private flicker of amusement. Normal women. My customers included heads of state and Hollywood icons. But I didn't correct her. I'd learned long ago that truth wasted on the blind was just noise. That's kind, I said softly. Rachel leaned in, her perfume heavy with jasmine and ego. Mom really admired you for keeping her dream alive, she said, too sweet. Even if it's not exactly lucrative. There it was, the subtle cruelty wrapped in silk. I'm not sure success has to be loud to be real, I replied. Oh, Elise, she said with that laugh that used to charm photographers. Always so poetic. I might have walked away then, but Aunt Martha joined the circle like a conductor cueing an encore. Elise, dear, she said. I have some clothes I was going to donate, barely worn. Very nice. Maybe you'd like them for your shop? They're from Banana Republic. The women nodded approvingly, as if she'd just offered me treasure. That's very thoughtful, I said, managing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Mom always said generosity is a form of self-expression. Blake appeared beside Rachel, tugging at his cuffs. Ellie, if you'd just asked, I could have helped expand your shop. Small business loans are my specialty. I studied his face, too much foundation over too little sleep. I appreciate the offer, I said evenly, but I think I'm doing all right. He chuckled. Come on, be realistic. Fashion's a hard industry. You can't keep playing dress up forever. Maybe, I said. But I found reality is flexible when you know how to tailor it. He blinked, confused, and Rachel giggled like she understood. She didn't. When they finally drifted off toward more profitable company, I escaped to the quiet of the hallway, where old photographs lined the wall. Mom standing outside her boutique, scissors in hand, smile radiant. She'd built beauty with thread and honesty, teaching women to wear themselves with pride. I traced the frame with my fingers and whispered, I kept your promise, Mom, even if they never noticed. Behind me, the organist played a tired hymn, and I realized I couldn't breathe inside that room any longer. I stepped outside into the drizzle, the air cool against my flushed cheeks. The world felt quieter out there, truer. The church bells tolled once, low and steady, and I imagined Mom's voice saying what she always did when people underestimated her. Let them. It cost nothing to be doubted. I smiled through the rain. And everything to be wrong. As I walked to my car, the damp wind lifted the edge of my dress, the silk whispering against my skin like a secret. They thought it was off the rack. They thought I was off the rack. But the thing about underestimating someone? It's a luxury you can't afford forever. Tomorrow, they'd go back to their marble kitchens and curated lives. I'd return to a small boutique on Cypress Avenue and the empire hidden beneath its floorboards. They'd mocked my dress. They had no idea it was a declaration. By the time I reached the boutique, night had folded itself over the city. The rain had stopped, leaving the asphalt slick and gleaming under the streetlights like black glass. From the outside, Eloise Atelier looked exactly as everyone in my family believed it to be: a small, charming storefront with a brass sign, a mannequin in the window, and soft amber light spilling through lace curtains. Nothing about it screamed empire. That was the point. Inside, the scent of cedarwood polish and fabric dye greeted me like memory. Every surface gleamed. The racks were lined with tailored pieces, blazers, gowns, and minimalist silhouettes that seemed to float. To the untrained eye, it was a boutique. To those who knew, it was the public face of a multi-billion-dollar design house. I walked to the back, past the dressing rooms, and placed my palm on the unmarked wooden panel. A soft click echoed. The floor beneath me hummed. Slowly, the hidden elevator descended, carrying me below the boutique, below the lie everyone had bought so easily. The doors opened to a world no one outside my circle had ever seen. Rows of workstations gleamed under warm light. Glass walls revealed ateliers where artisans worked in quiet concentration. Rolls of silk and wool in every shade imaginable, stretched across long tables. In the center stood a 3D garment scanner, its sensors blinking softly like constellations. "Welcome back, Miss Morgan," a voice said. Elisa, my senior designer, appeared with a tablet in hand and a smile that reached her eyes. "Everything's ready for your review." "Thank you," I said, slipping off my coat. "How's the new collection performing?" She swiped the screen and turned it toward me. Pre-orders for the fall line exceeded projections by 23%. Our Paris division wants to expand the couture capsule. Oh, and Vogue just confirmed the cover feature for next month. I exhaled slowly. Good, keep the numbers quiet until after the press embargo. Elisa hesitated, then asked gently, "How was the funeral?" I paused. The hum of sewing machines filled the silence. "Predictable," I said finally. "Rachel made sure of that." She nodded, understanding without prying. Elisa had been with me from the beginning, back when Eloise Atelier was nothing but sketches in a basement apartment and unpaid dreams. She knew how deep the scars ran, and how deliberate my silence was. I crossed to my office, minimalist, all glass and walnut, and sat before the wall of monitors displaying live data from our branches: New York, Milan, Tokyo, Dubai. Each location pulsed with color, sales, and supply chains dancing across the screen. To the world, I was E. Morgan, the reclusive designer known for timeless silhouettes and mystery. No one had ever connected the name to Elise Morgan, the failed daughter, who still drove a Prius. That anonymity was my armor. I scrolled through the day's financial reports. Blake's firm was showing alarming deficits. Insider rumors confirmed an ongoing audit. Dad's real estate holdings were leveraged beyond saving. Rachel's sponsorship deals had evaporated after a quiet scandal leaked through a PR whisper chain I hadn't started, but hadn't stopped either. Justice, I'd discovered, sometimes arrives in silence. I leaned back and let the irony settle. My family had spent their lives chasing prestige, drowning in borrowed money and borrowed pride. I had built mine from the ground up, thread by thread, stitch by stitch. Every time they called me nothing, I'd invested that insult into something lasting. Elisa knocked softly on the glass. "The design team's waiting for your input on the bridal prototypes," she said. "Send them in," I replied. 4 designers entered, carrying mannequins draped in ivory silk. The fabric caught the light like liquid moonlight. As they positioned them, I felt a flicker of memory. Mom standing in her own small shop, guiding my hands over a sewing machine, saying, "Don't chase trends, Elise. Build truth into every seam." I ran my fingers over the silk, the way I used to trace her patterns. "This one," I said, pointing to the simplest dress. It's the kind of elegance Mom would have loved. Too understated for the luxury clients? One designer asked. Understated, I said softly, is a luxury only the confident can afford. They nodded. Notes were taken. Adjustments made. By the time the meeting ended, it was close to midnight. I walked alone through the atelier, lights dimming automatically behind me, machines powering down with a whisper. At the far end of the hallway, a single photograph hung, the only personal thing on these walls. Mom, standing outside her boutique 30 years ago, scissors in hand, eyes bright with the kind of faith that could move mountains. I stopped in front of it, brushing a speck of dust from the glass. You'd laugh if you saw them today, Mom, I whispered, still measuring worth in handbags and headlines. For a moment, the grief I'd kept buried surfaced, sharp, clean, honest. But beneath it was something else. Resolve. I pressed the elevator button and watched the doors close, sealing the secret once again. Upstairs, the city slept, blissfully unaware that under a modest little boutique on Cypress Avenue, I was rewriting the rules of power, one quiet stitch at a time. By the end of that week, the cracks in my family's perfect facades had begun to widen. Karma didn't need my help, it just needed time. But I watched anyway, the way a tailor studies a flawed seam before deciding whether to mend or let it unravel. The first unraveling came from Blake. He'd always been the golden boy, sharp suit, easy grin, a Rolodex of connections he never deserved. I saw his name flash across my screen early Monday morning in a financial briefing my analysts had prepared. Morgan Capital Holdings, under investigation for insider trading. Poetic, isn't it? Alisa said softly when she handed me the file. I read the summary. The Securities Commission had frozen Blake's accounts, and his biggest investors were pulling out. The rumor mill blamed a whistleblower, though in truth, Blake had sabotaged himself long before anyone else needed to. He'd once lectured me about ambition, said I'd never make it big because I didn't play the game. I smiled then, and I smiled again now because I'd learned that real power doesn't shout. It waits. 2 days later, Rachel's world began to crack too. It started with a scandal she didn't see coming. Someone leaked private emails between her and a photographer, flirtatious, manipulative, and, in parts, cruel. The press devoured it. Her sponsors fled overnight. I didn't have to lift a finger. When her name began trending for the wrong reasons, I found myself staring at the news alert longer than I should have. Not with satisfaction, though I'd be lying if I said there wasn't some of that, but with a strange sadness. Rachel had always needed to be adored. It was her oxygen. Now the air had gone thin. Alisa knocked on my office door that afternoon. Another press outlet is asking for comment, she said carefully. On what? On whether E. Morgan will be dressing Rachel Morgan for the upcoming gala. I looked up from my sketches. Tell them E. Morgan doesn't dress clients who mistake cruelty for confidence. Alisa hesitated, then smiled faintly. Understood. As for my father, Gerald Morgan, the man who used to measure love in assets, his fall came quietly. His largest property deal had collapsed when a developer pulled funding, citing ethical concerns. The bank called in his debts. Within weeks, his empire of concrete and glass was nothing but paperwork and pride. He called me one night, his voice heavy and unfamiliar. Elise, he said, skipping any pretense of affection. I need to discuss something. Of course. You know the boutique, your mother's old shop. My stomach tightened. Yes? I'm considering selling the property. I've had some offers. I took a long breath, steady and slow. You can't sell what doesn't belong to you. A pause. Excuse me? Mom's will transferred ownership to me. You signed the documents yourself. He exhaled sharply. That was years ago. You assumed wrong, I said quietly. It's staying in the family, my side of it. For the first time, he sounded uncertain. I'm struggling, Elise. Things have changed. I almost softened. Almost. But then I remembered the years of dismissive smirks, the times he'd introduced me as our creative one, like a child's hobby instead of a career. I hope you find your footing, Dad, I said. Truly, but I'm not your solution. He didn't reply, only silence, followed by the faint click of a man used to ending calls first, now unsure how to. That night, I sat alone in my penthouse office. Lights dimmed, city glittering far below. The screens in front of me pulsed with reports, sales, trends, market chatter, but I wasn't thinking about profits. I was thinking about justice. Not revenge. That word was too small. What I felt was balance. Years ago, they'd called me weak for following sentimental dreams. Now I owned the very industry that had once looked down on me. The irony wasn't lost, it was poetic. But poetry doesn't heal, it only reveals. I poured myself a glass of red wine, the same vintage Mom used to favor, and whispered to the empty room, "You were right, Mom. They'd rather drown in pride than ask for help." The elevator chimed behind me. Elisa stepped in, carrying a folder. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, "but there's something you should see." She handed me a photo, a paparazzi shot. Rachel, outside a downtown cafe, crying behind oversized sunglasses. The caption read, "Former model Rachel Morgan seen in tears as career crumbles." I set it down slowly. "The internet can be merciless," I said. "She brought it on herself," Elisa said. "Still, she's your sister." "I know," I said quietly. "That's what makes it harder." That night, sleep wouldn't come. I kept hearing Mom's voice. "Don't let bitterness sew itself into your seams, Elise. Once it's in the fabric, it never comes out." When I finally drifted off near dawn, I dreamed of standing in her boutique again, sunlight spilling through the front window. She was there, smiling, scissors in hand. "You've done enough, sweetheart," she said. "Now stitch something softer." I woke with tears on my cheeks. Maybe Mom was right. Maybe it was time to stop watching them fall. Maybe it was time to decide what I'd build next with or without them. It happened the following Sunday, the day everything that had been whispered, avoided, and disguised finally cracked open under its own weight. I was sketching in the quiet of my studio when my phone buzzed with a message from my father. "Family meeting, 5 p.m. Your presence is expected." Expected. The word hit like an old bruise. He still spoke as though authority were a birthright, not a relic. I stared at the message for a long time before replying simply, "I'll be there." The house looked smaller than I remembered. The manicured hedges had gone slightly wild, the marble steps stained from neglect. It was strange how fast grandeur fades when no one can afford to maintain it. Inside, Rachel was perched on the edge of the couch, scrolling through her phone with trembling fingers. Her makeup couldn't hide the exhaustion beneath her eyes. Blake sat opposite, his tie loosened, a stack of unopened mail on the coffee table beside him, likely notices from the bank. Dad stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, staring at the rain. When he turned, his voice was steady but stripped of arrogance. "Thank you for coming, Elise." I nodded. "What's this about?" He exchanged a look with Blake, who cleared his throat. "We're in a difficult financial position," Blake began, voice hesitant. "Between the investigation and Dad's property issues, things are complicated." Rachel's voice, smaller than I'd ever heard it, broke in. "We might lose the house." I sat down, folded my hands, and waited. Dad exhaled, long and weary. "Your mother left that boutique to you. It's prime property. If we sell it, we can stabilize the family finances." The words landed like shards of glass. Sell Mom's boutique, the place where she'd built her dream, where I'd built mine. "No," I said. He blinked. "Elise, be reasonable. It's just a building." "No," I repeated, firmer. "It's not just a building." Blake leaned forward, frustration bubbling up. "Don't be selfish. We're family. You can rebuild somewhere else." Rachel's voice sharpened, her old venom resurfacing. "You don't even make money there, Elise. What's the point of clinging to it?" Something inside me shifted, then not anger, but clarity. For years, I'd let them define my worth in whispers. Not anymore. I rose slowly. "You really have no idea, do you?" Dad frowned. "About what?" I looked at each of them in turn. Rachel in her designer dress she could no longer afford. Blake, sweating behind a facade of competence. Dad, still clinging to control that had long since slipped away. "You think the boutique is just a sentimental hobby," I said quietly. "But everything you've ever mocked, every design, every late night you called a waste of time, built something far beyond what you could imagine. Rachel scoffed. Oh, please, what are you talking about? I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. Inside were glossy pages, press clippings, cover shoots, awards, Forbes profiles. I dropped them on the coffee table, one by one. Vogue, Time 100 Innovators. CEO Quarterly, the woman behind E. Morgan. Blake squinted. E. Morgan? I met his eyes. Elise Morgan. E. Morgan. That's me. For a heartbeat, the room went utterly still. Rachel blinked, then let out a shaky laugh. No, that's impossible. Dad's voice cracked. You mean you run that fashion house? The one on the news? Yes, I said simply. I own it. I built it. The boutique is its headquarters. They just stared at me. Rachel's phone slipped from her hand, landing on the carpet with a dull thud. All these years, Blake muttered. All this time we thought you were struggling. I was building, I said. And I never corrected you, because sometimes silence is more powerful than proof. Dad's expression softened with something I'd never seen before, not pride, exactly, but awe, laced with regret. Elise, why didn't you tell us? I smiled sadly. Because you never asked. You only assumed. Rachel rose suddenly, tears streaking her foundation. So what? You're just better than us now? No, I said, stepping closer. Just freer. Because I stopped measuring my worth by your approval. Silence filled the room. Outside, thunder rolled across the bay, distant but certain. Finally, I placed a small envelope on the table. Mom left this for you, I said. In her will. I found it when I was finalizing the boutique's estate files. Dad picked it up with shaking hands, unfolded the note, and read aloud. To my family. The one who builds quietly often builds the strongest foundation. Don't mistake simplicity for weakness, or silence for submission. One day, you'll see what love stitched in patience can become. Margaret. The room fell into a hush so deep I could hear the rain tapping against the glass. I turned toward the door. The boutique isn't for sale, I said. But I'll help in other ways if you're ready to start over honestly. Rachel whispered. Elise, I don't even know who you are anymore. I paused at the doorway. I'm still your sister, just the one you never looked at long enough to see. And then I left, heels clicking softly on marble, the sound of quiet retribution echoing behind me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking away in shame. I was walking away in truth. The following morning, the world knew. It started with a single post from the Fashion Ledger. Confirmed, the elusive designer E. Morgan is none other than Elise Morgan, daughter of the late Margaret Morgan, founder of the boutique that became a global fashion empire. Within hours, my inbox exploded. Every outlet wanted an interview, every brand wanted a partnership, and every person who had once dismissed me suddenly remembered my name. But fame doesn't feel like power. It feels like noise. I turned off my phone and opened the curtains to my penthouse view, the same city that had once watched me fail. Now it shimmered with early sunlight, almost forgiving. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to breathe without hiding. That afternoon, Rachel called. Her voice was hoarse, small. Elise, can we talk? There was no malice in her tone, just exhaustion. Of course, I said. We met at a quiet cafe near the harbor. She arrived disguised under a cap and dark glasses, but no disguise could hide the defeat in her posture. She didn't order anything, just sat across from me, stirring air with her spoon. I don't even know where to start, she said. I was awful to you. For years. I thought your calm meant weakness. I thought, her voice cracked. I thought Mom loved you more. She didn't love anyone more, I said gently. She just saw people for who they could be. And sometimes, that scared us. Rachel looked up, eyes red. I'm sorry. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rehearsed, just raw. And for that reason alone, I believed her. I reached into my bag and slid a simple folder across the table. This is an offer. I can't fix your reputation, but I can give you a start. We have an entry-level role in brand relations, real work, real hours. You'll earn your place, but it'll be honest. She stared at me. You'd hire me? I smiled faintly. I'd give you the chance Mom gave me. Tears filled her eyes. I don't deserve that. Neither did I once, I said. But she still believed. Rachel nodded slowly, gripping the folder like a lifeline. When she left, she turned once at the door and whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a beginning. 2 days later, Dad showed up at the boutique. Not the penthouse office, the small, amber-lit storefront where it had all started. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the mannequins in the window. When I stepped outside, he straightened his jacket, though it hung looser now on his frame. "I didn't come to argue," he said, "or to ask for money." "All right." He took a deep breath. "Your mother would be proud. She saw something I didn't. I thought strength meant control. You proved it means endurance." For once, there was no superiority in his voice, only honesty. "Thank you," I said quietly. He hesitated. "I lost the house." I nodded. "I know." He looked at me, ashamed. "I don't suppose." "I already arranged for a small apartment downtown," I said. "1 year's rent paid. After that, it's yours to handle. I won't let you drown, Dad, but I won't carry you either." He blinked, taken aback. Then, to my surprise, he nodded. "Fair." When he turned to leave, I saw him pause by Mom's old photograph in the display window. He touched the glass with trembling fingers. "I failed her," he said softly. "No," I whispered. "You just took longer to learn what she already knew." That night, the world of fashion roared with celebration, news anchors, investors, press headlines, all shouting my name. But I didn't attend the parties. Instead, I stood in my atelier beneath the warm light, surrounded by silence and the sound of distant rain. Elisa entered quietly. "They're calling you the woman who stitched her own revenge," she said, half amused, half proud. I laughed softly. "Revenge isn't the right word." "What would you call it then?" I looked around at the fabrics, the sketches, the life that had bloomed from pain. "Restoration," I said. "For Mom, for myself, for all the women who were told they were small." Elisa nodded. "And your family?" I thought for a moment. "They'll heal too. Maybe not fast. But one day, they'll remember me not for what I hid, but for what I didn't say." Outside, thunder rolled again, distant but calm, like the echo of a storm that had finally passed. For the first time, I felt peace. Not triumph, not vindication. Just quiet, steady peace, the kind that comes when you stop sewing for approval and start stitching for truth. 6 months later, the storm had passed, not forgotten, but transformed. The headlines had faded, the gossip had grown old, and what remained was the quieter work of rebuilding, not of wealth, but of dignity. Rachel arrived at the boutique every morning before dawn. No makeup, no entourage, no filtered selfies, just her and the steady hum of reality. Her first assignment had been simple: assist with inventory and client fittings. She'd balked at first. The Rachel I used to know would have scoffed at the idea of holding pins or steaming fabric, but she stayed. One afternoon, I passed her in the workroom, kneeling beside a client adjusting the hem of a silk skirt. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her voice was soft, patient. When our eyes met, she smiled, a small, real smile I hadn't seen since we were girls sewing doll clothes from Mom's scraps. Later that evening, Elisa told me quietly, "She's good. Clumsy, but good. The clients like her warmth." "Ah," I nodded. "She's learning humility. The best fabric for strength." Blake's story was harder. After his firm collapsed, he avoided me for weeks. Then one day, he showed up at the penthouse office in a borrowed suit, thinner and grayer than I'd ever seen him. "I'm here to take responsibility," he said, placing a folder on my desk. "Full disclosure, financial records, offshore accounts, everything the investigators need. I'm cooperating." I studied him for a long moment. "Why now?" He sighed. "Because Mom wouldn't have wanted me to rot hiding behind lawyers, and because you were right about everything." When the investigation ended months later, Blake avoided jail time through restitution and transparency. He began working for a non-profit financial consultancy, helping small businesses rebuild after fraud. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. Sometimes he'd stop by the boutique after hours, sleeves rolled up, helping Rachel carry boxes upstairs. The two of them would laugh in that awkward, careful way of people trying to rediscover family. It was fragile, but it was real. Dad, or Gerald, as he now insisted, people call him, had started volunteering at a local community center, teaching basic carpentry. His pride had burned away, leaving something humbler in its place. When he visited me on Sundays, he always brought small wooden trinkets he'd carved himself, a paperweight, a jewelry box, once even a sewing kit. "These hands aren't useless after all," he'd joke. I'd smile and run my fingers over the smooth grain. "Neither is your heart," I'd reply. One evening, I called a quiet meeting in the atelier. The room glowed under amber light. Bolts of new spring fabric lined the walls. My team gathered, and behind them, timid but curious, stood Rachel, Blake, and Dad. "I have something new to announce," I said. "A foundation." Elisa stepped forward, handing me a portfolio embossed with gold lettering. "The Margaret Morgan Foundation for Women in Design. This fund will support young designers who can't afford education," I continued. "Mothers, daughters, women who dream with their hands but are told it's impractical. We'll mentor them, equip them, and showcase their work through Eloise Atelier." Rachel's eyes glistened. "It's what Mom always wanted." I nodded. "And what she built us for?" Blake smiled faintly. "You're really giving back after all that happened?" I met his gaze. "Revenge ends cycles. Redemption continues them." Dad cleared his throat. "Your mother would have been proud." For once, the room didn't feel divided into sides, only one family, stitched together by loss and learning. When everyone had gone, I lingered in the quiet atelier. Outside, twilight poured through the tall windows, painting everything in shades of lavender and gold. I walked to Mom's old sewing table, still kept in the corner. The wood bore scratches from decades of work, but it stood steady, beautiful in its imperfections. On it sat the tiny box Dad had carved, the one holding her last pearl buttons. I opened it, running a thumb across the smooth white surface. Those buttons had once fastened the first dress she ever sold, the one that paid our rent when Dad's business faltered. She'd kept them all these years as a reminder that creation could save you when pride couldn't. I held them in my palm and whispered, "We're all right now, Mom. You can rest." A quiet peace settled around me, soft as fabric. Outside, rain began again, not stormy this time, but gentle, cleansing. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was living beneath the weight of the past. I was living beyond it. The following Sunday, I invited everyone to dinner, not in my penthouse overlooking the bay, but in the small apartment above the original boutique. The same one Mom used to live in when times were lean, where the scent of lavender still clung to the curtains she'd sewn herself. I cooked her favorite meal, roasted chicken with thyme and honey-glazed carrots, because it wasn't fancy, but it was real, just like her. When Rachel arrived, she was carrying flowers instead of handbags, simple lilies, tied with twine. Blake came next, sleeves rolled up, a quiet humility in his step. Dad followed last, wearing a pressed shirt and bringing a bottle of wine that probably cost more than he could afford now. We ate together for the first time in years, without raised voices or subtle jabs, just laughter, awkward at first, then easy, genuine. Rachel told us about a client she'd helped that week, a single mother who cried when she saw herself in one of our gowns. She said she'd never felt beautiful before, Rachel said softly. "It reminded me of Mom." Blake nodded. "We're both trying to do better. It's weird, but I actually like who I'm becoming." Dad lifted his glass. "To your mother," he said, voice trembling. "She was right about all of us. We just needed to fall before we could rise." We toasted to Mom, to change, to second chances. After dinner, I brought out a small envelope that had been sealed for months. "I found this," I said, placing it in the center of the table. "It's addressed to all of us." Blake carefully opened it and began to read aloud. "My loves, if you're reading this, it means time has given you distance and, I hope, perspective. I know our family has been stitched with pride and frayed by misunderstanding, but remember, fabric only tears where it's weakest, and weakness can be mended. Elise, my dreamer, I always knew you'd create something that mattered. Let your work be your forgiveness. Rachel, my mirror, don't confuse beauty with worth. The world will always admire the wrong things first, but it's never too late to redefine what's valuable. Blake, my builder power without conscience collapses. Use your second chance to build differently. And Gerald, love them as I loved you. Not for what they accomplish, but for what they survive. When you find peace with each other, you'll find me again in the sound of the sewing machine, in the smell of cedar and silk, in every quiet moment where grace feels heavier than regret. Mom. By the time he finished, not one of us could speak. The rain outside had turned to mist, brushing softly against the windows. Dad finally said, voice breaking, "She wrote this knowing exactly how we'd break. And how we'd mend," I whispered. Later that night, after they'd gone, I walked downstairs into the boutique. The city was asleep, the display lights dimmed to a gentle glow. I ran my fingers along the fabric rolls, each one a silent story. On the work table sat the last piece I'd been designing, a gown made from raw silk, soft and strong. Its lining shimmered with pale gold thread, stitched in the pattern of a heart. I hadn't planned it that way. It just happened, as though my hands remembered something my mind didn't. I sewed the final pearl button onto the back one of Mom's, and held the gown up to the light. It glowed. In that moment, I felt her everywhere, in the hum of the sewing machine, in the stillness of the room, in the peace that finally fit me as perfectly as the dress itself. I whispered into the quiet, "Thank you, Mom, for teaching me that sometimes the most elegant revenge is grace." The city lights flickered softly beyond the window, reflecting off the glass like stars. And for the first time, I didn't feel unseen. I felt home,